COD Zombies may be one of the most loved game modes of all time, but there are some things that everyone just hates. From the worst luck imaginable to having your wonder weapon literally stolen from you. But even those might not be as annoying as this power up, let me explain. Back in the day, there were tons of things that were massively important in a COD Zombies match if you wanted to get yourself set up. But the big one was being very efficient with your points, which of course meant making sure to shoot the undead as many times as possible before finishing them off with a knife. But there was one thing that could destroy all of your hard work in an instant, and it was so frustrating. Because every player knows the anger of having their early round points grind totally ruined by a nuke. You know exactly what I'm talking about, those situations where you wipe out a zombie with a melee attack and before you even have time to react, that famous power-up has already exploded in your face, wiping out the rest of the walking corpses, essentially stealing a huge number of possible points from you. There were very few things more frustrating than this back in the old school days when early round points were so important. But possibly even more annoying than that is not being able to pack-a-punch your weapon because you can't even find the damn machine. There's no doubt that over the years, Pack-a-Punch quests became one of the most important things in the game mode, with them ranging from way more simple in some of the modern games to insanely complicated back in a few of the major Treyarch classics. Being able to throw your weapon in the PAP has often been a very controversial subject. Well, maybe not the machine itself, but the process to get it in various maps certainly has, as well as various features it brought to the game. And certain ones have been absolutely hated by the community, like the teleporting Pack-a-Punch machine, particularly in Blood of the Dead. This mechanic was way less of a problem in maps like Call of the Dead, as the lighthouse would of course indicate where it was, but in Blood, not so much. The devs decided to make this thing move to certain locations on Alcatraz Island, but not even tell fans where it had gone to, leaving them to have to search at the different possible spawns in order to find it. It honestly made no sense to have this system in the map, particularly as many years earlier in Der Eisendrache it also existed, but Treyarch made sure to tell you exactly where it had moved to. Honestly, I am not surprised at all that the community really did hate the Pack-a-Punch on Blood of the Dead. Something else that could be even more disliked than this though was being the most unlucky player of all time on Moon. Loads of fans will remember dropping into this map and standing there just waiting to see what perk was going to drop near the teleporter. Because if you played in BO1, you'll know that you are obviously looking for it to be Jug, as that would then allow you to rack up a load of points in no man's land so you could grab the perk and have Jug on round 1 when arriving on the surface of the moon. But the big problem here was that there was only a 50% chance that this would happen, with the other possible option being Speed Cola. And if you played this map a lot, you'll probably still have nightmares about having to restart 10 times in a row, because every single time you arrived you would end up getting Speed Cola instead of Jug. And if that was the case, your only option was to either play through tons of rounds, get a whole load of points, make your way through Griffin Station to the teleporter and then back to Groom Lake again in order to get Jug, or to just start over and reload the map again. You could be driven into madness by the terrible luck of spawning into Speed Cola over and over and over again. It's one of the most hated parts of this great experience. But way worse than that has got to be an infamous enemy that unfortunately makes one of Treyarch's Zombies experiences nearly unplayable. Let's be real, remaking Nuketown as a main DLC map for Black Ops 4 was not a popular choice with a lot of people in the community, but there were still many who were willing to give it a chance, particularly as it was being expanded in a big way. All of that fell apart though when fans began to explore the Broken Arrow facility, descended into the underground bunker and activated the power, as this would be their first glimpse at the Nova Bombers, these bright yellow gas-producing scumbags. But they themselves aren't even the issue in Alpha Omega, it's what they do to the normal undead. As you could immediately see that zombies would be buffed, giving them a glowing yellow effect, making them way more awkward to take out. If this had been a one-time thing that happened solely when players were activating the generator, it wouldn't be an issue, but that was not the case. Every single time fans made the choice to go in the brand new expanded area below ground, Nova Bombers would spawn in, causing the creation of these juiced up undead meatheads. Which annoyingly meant that half of this reimagined experience was totally off limits to you unless you were willing to make the round by round gameplay way more difficult for yourself. It honestly seemed like a terrible choice from the devs, and it was absolutely hated by most players. Another very strange decision could actually be found in the same game, and it really made you ask the question, why would you do this? Any older Zombies players will definitely remember how important a shield was, from blasting dragon fire at the undead to flying into them with a rocket-propelled battering ram. These things were incredible, particularly in Black Ops 3. They also stuck around in BO4 as well, although certain versions of them were definitely less impressive. It wasn't really the quality of the actual shield here though that some fans had a problem with, it was how they were being forced to get hold of it. Because for the first time ever, players were now forced to pay in order to get a new shield when their old one broke, and the prices could go into the thousands, even costing as much as pack-a-punching for God's sake. Making fans pay to grab another shield was a pretty wild choice, to be honest, even if it was only done to fix a problem, as at the time the community had discovered some pretty insane shield camping strategies that Treyarch wanted to nerf, so they added the shield purchase. The stupid thing is, this could have been solved in so many other ways, like throwing in a cooldown to stop you grabbing this thing too quickly. But no, they decided to anger a large number of players with this crazy mechanic. Whoever thought that inflation would be added to COD Zombies? Kinda wild. Is there anything more hated though than being fortunate enough to get an OP wonder weapon and having it snatched away from you by the undead? We all know there is a massive number of incredibly useful perks in Zombies, from PhD stopping all explosive damage to Vulture Aid hiding you from the Horde. But one that fans don't really talk about anywhere near as much is Mule Kick. I mean, getting a third gun can be useful, but if you've already got the most OP weapon in the map, do you even really need one? And as any smart players will tell you, a pretty annoying problem can arise with this perk if you're not paying attention when grabbing stuff from the mystery box. Because if you don't know which weapon was the third to be added into your inventory, or your mule kit weapon as the community would say, then when you go down you will obviously lose your perks and that weapon will be snatched off you. It could be absolutely brutal if you manage to get something as insane as the Apothecon Servant only for it to be lost back into the mystery box after too many slaps from a zombie. There is a reason that suffering this fate has absolutely led to some serious crash outs over the years. If we're talking about the mystery box though, there's something else we've got to touch on, because losing your third weapon is not the only hated thing related to this feature. What about never even managing to get it in the first place? What's the stupidest thing you can do when trying to hit the good old box for 950 points? Do it in the middle of a round, of course, when you're getting swamped by the undead, as there is a pretty solid chance this will only lead to a lot of anger from a player who spins the box, gets extremely lucky and gets something absolutely incredible, only to not have the opportunity to even grab it before their time's up. There are few things more stressful in Zombies than seeing an insane weapon sitting there floating in the mystery box and you have to watch as it gradually just descends back inside and disappears. No doubt this is something that everyone can relate to. It's got to be one of the most hated scenarios that all players have experienced. That's not the only thing that 99% of fans can relate to though, because Zetsubou no Shima has the ability to drive people insane with one of its most unique mechanics. It brought quite a lot of fresh stuff to the table, some of which we'll get onto shortly, but now why don't we talk about something loads of zombie players hate? Plants. No, not in real life, well, I mean, maybe, I don't know, but I'm referring to the plant growing system from this map specifically, and particularly its role in Zetsubou's main quest. To be fair to this map, there are tons of hugely practical uses for this feature, from being able to hold a zombie to get tasks done, to copying yourself so that if you go down you'll get to keep your entire loadout. But as Black Ops 3 fans will know, this mechanic extended even further and was intertwined with the Easter egg too. In order to shoot down a plane flying overhead, fans needed to get hold of a massive shell, but for some weird reason it had to be grown. Yeah, I know, work that one out. And the hated part of this whole thing is the fact that you can't even guarantee you'll get it from growing the correct plant. It's entirely random and based on luck. You only have a chance to get the bullet, meaning you could be watering these things over and over again and not even getting what you need, which can completely ruin Easter egg speedruns. There are quite a few things that are massively disliked about Zetsubou no Shima, but this step right here could be at the top of the list. Who knows, maybe it isn't though, perhaps it's this guy instead. Black Ops 3 was known for some fairly incredible mini-bosses, hulking Russian metal monsters, three-headed tentacle beasts, and the return of a twisted corpse in a giant powered-up suit, but remember, they were all pretty popular. But this guy really was not. The Thrasher was absolutely hated for a number of reasons. But the main one is the fact that the spawn rates for the Thrasher compared to other BO3 mini-bosses were an absolute joke. More of these things can spawn on the map at any moment by zombies merely getting infected by gas from spores. This is not some Panzer Soldat scenario where you know that only one of them is going to drop from the sky every 5 rounds or so. There can be numerous Thrashers running around the island at any one time, terrorising you and dropping you to the deck in just 2 hits, and that's even with Jug. It's no wonder these things are pretty hated. I'm afraid the time has come though for something awful. Something I really don't want to do, something I'd hoped I'd never have to do again. It's time to talk about Vanguard Zombies. I know, I am so sorry. Is there anything more hated in the history of the franchise than this, can we say game? Yeah, I suppose. So not everything about Vanguard was awful. Shi no Numa Reborn was honestly not bad, even if it was nearly entirely reused content. However, let's not for 1 second suggest that both Duranfang and Terra Maledicta were anything other than really bad and completely hated by nearly the entire community. There was just nothing to these experiences, some weird combination of weak objectives and boring gameplay taking place on totally uninspiring maps. Completing tasks to open new areas that you can literally see right there 3 feet in front of your face. It offered next to nothing for 99% of Zombies players, which is why they gave up on it almost immediately. It was clear that it was a total mess and not worth sinking any serious time into. And most fans would say it could well be the worst content that the community has ever been given. Don't get me wrong though, it's a very close race with another well-known DLC that we'll get onto later. For now though, let's take a look at one of the most hated changes ever forced upon the COD Zombies community. Black Ops 4 did a lot of things wrong, some of them we've already spoken about, but there was one thing that made the rest of that game's issues seem like nothing. Although loads of players would probably admit that back then they were looking for the next evolution of BO3, I don't think this change was what they were expecting or wanting. Treyarch decided to implement the biggest switch up to perks that anyone had ever seen, and it did not go down well with fans. The customization was a cool idea, allowing people to take whatever perks with them into a game that they wanted, but not only did it lead to most people just using the same 4 perks constantly, which was the problem this change set out to solve, but it ended up adding something that absolutely no one wanted. The most boring and uninspiring collection of perk machines ever seen. Gone were the unique dispensers and the catchy jingles, booted out for dull, soulless replacements that retain none of the magic from the previous games. It was absolutely gutting to see the classics gone from this game, and these fake and false versions were massively hated by so many fans. But were they as disliked as the most unpopular boss fight that the game has ever added? There was a lot of hype floating around the community during Black Ops 6 for various maps, and being real with you, some of them delivered. Things like Terminus and the Shattered Veil were considered by many to be top level content, at least in terms of modern zombies anyway. But we can't sit here and suggest that that was the case with every DLC, because we all know that the Tomb didn't go down well with a lot of players. This was obviously for many reasons, like reusing the eye staff, the weak story on display here, and the fact that the map was so small. But none of these were as hated as what was described as a boss fight against a piece of furniture. The final battle with the Sentinel artifact was really controversial at the time of release, and although players have softened slightly on it now, it's still remembered as a bit of a mess. The same dull stages being repeated over and over, spammed mini-bosses wiping out players in what felt like no time, and a final wipe attack that could make the entire thing pointless in a second. It was an underwhelming conclusion to a map that was already pretty hated, and it's unlikely to be remembered positively by most members of the community. Some things in COD Zombies though are just pure stress-inducing, particularly if you're trying to get yourself set up for a high round attempt. Nuketown may be a pretty basic map, but it's well known for having a very unique feature. With perks and pack-a-punch constantly falling from the sky every few rounds, it can totally change up how every game in this experience has to be played. But with this mechanic can come some extremely annoying results, because of course it's all based entirely on RNG, meaning you can be totally screwed over if you have bad luck. Having to wait until the higher rounds to get Jug or even Pack-a-Punch can be a total nightmare on this map, and if you end up in this situation, it seems totally understandable if you end up hating it. Even some of the coolest maps in Zombies history have mechanics that can leave players absolutely hating them. We all know that Berry contains some of the most unique features the devs have ever added, like being able to draw weapons on the wall wherever you want and getting Leroy to lock the mystery box in place so it can't move. One thing it doesn't really have though is a mini-boss, unless of course you count the witch that haunts the giant house. And it's that ghostly figure that can absolutely ruin games for players if they're not careful, and that's probably something nearly every fan has experienced. With you having to progress through the mansion in order to get to Pack-a-Punch, it's not exactly something you can avoid, as not only can she absolutely wipe out everything you've worked so hard for and essentially stop you being able to upgrade your weapons by stealing every single one of your points, but she is also responsible for some pretty heart-thumping jump scares if you're not paying attention or not expecting her to come around the corner. But I'm pretty sure most fans would gladly deal with the witch than an enemy type that exists way too much in modern zombies. You probably hear that sentence and think doppelgas, manglers, amalgams, but no, I'm talking about something that appears way more often than those. I'm just gonna say it, no one wants armoured undead in COD Zombies, and if given the choice, pretty much every player would delete them in a heartbeat. Although these things definitely saw positive changes as the modern era has progressed, they are still totally hated. There really does not need to be any middle ground between normal zombies and mini-bosses. Fans love building strategies around the standard undead which can be changed on the fly when some other hulking monster shows up on the map, but this can become so complicated and frustrating when some of those zombies are randomly given buffed up armor which takes ages to deplete. It was clearly a mechanic that only the devs wanted to add to the game, as no fans have ever asked for this. Which is why, to be honest, no matter how much they change these enemies, they're always gonna be hated. Even with that said though, they're still nowhere near as unpopular as one of the most disliked enemies that the community has ever seen. Infinite Warfare Zombies famously dropped straight after the end of BO3, so it was always going to have an uphill battle attempting to convince fans that it was worth a shot. And in many ways, over a long period of time, it managed to do this with its unique map themes, interesting wonder weapons and well thought out boss fights. Not everything landed as well as these though, because certain things just did not work and essentially ended up totally destroying DLCs. And the best possible example of this is the ninjas in Shaolin Shuffle. There are not many enemies as broken as these guys, and the devs have added a fair few stinkers over the years. They were well known for destroying games in an instant, spawning out of a cloud of smoke and doing their best to cause the player serious problems. Even worse than them showing up on theme in Shaolin Shuffle was their reappearance in the Beast from Beyond, as they were even more broken somehow. Their abilities just didn't fit at all in combination with the other enemies on the map, meaning it was next to impossible to avoid their attacks. It was a truly awful decision to include them here and made that DLC one of the most hated of all time. Everyone loves Pack-a-Punch, right? Sticking your weapon in this classic machine, pulling it back out again with the extra juice to take down the undead. It's one of the best features ever introduced into zombies. But on a rare occasion, it can lead to huge rage moments if you're forced into totally screwing it up. Okay, hear me out. You could be the biggest pro in the community, but there is absolutely no way that you haven't lost your weapon in the Pack-a-Punch machine at some point during your zombies career. Even the smartest players of all time, who 99% of the time would wait till the end of the round to pap, have taken risks at some point and just thought, I'll do it now, whilst also being swarmed by the horde. And it's not gone well for them, being blocked from grabbing it back again or straight up getting dropped and having to watch as it disappears, with you losing your 5,000 points and your gun. It also gets so much worse if what vanishes is a wonder weapon. It's brutal. To be honest though, there's a perk in Black Ops 2 that most fans wish would vanish. It's that bad. Zombies is always experimenting with new ones, trying to find that next banger that becomes part of the game's permanent catalogue. PhD, Deadshot Daiquiri, Stamina Up, they're all great. But as for Who's Who, not so much. There is a reason that this thing only ever appeared in one map, Die Rise, and was then wiped from existence because it sucked. Big time. Sure, having the opportunity to revive yourself after going down and keeping all of your perks sounds brilliant. The main problem was that Who's Who only gave you a damn pistol in order to do it. So explain this then. The situation you were in was bad enough to make you hit the deck even with actual weapons, but you're somehow expected to be able to get the res off with a gun that will do next to no damage to the zombies. Make it make sense. And that's exactly what this perk did not do. Make sense. That's why it was never seen again. It was so bad that no doubt most players wouldn't even care if it was taken off the mid-game, and on that note, we've got to talk about this guy. Picture the scenario, you load into a game of Moon and don't have to deal with terrible luck that I mentioned earlier with getting the right perk because it's Jug waiting for you at Groom Lake. You put the work in to slay as many of the undead as possible and get enough points to buy the perk, you're ready to go and you teleport to the surface of the moon. All good, right? Yeah, not so much, because then this fool shows up and ruins everything. The astronaut grabs hold of you, and if you don't react quick enough, boom, Jug is gone and you're back to square one again. And not only that, but now when you eventually make your way through the map and back into the teleporter, it will be that damn speed cola waiting for you on the other side. So after you've lost the most valuable perk, you're going to have to make 2 trips back to Groom Lake in order to get it again, and that right there is why this guy sucks and everyone hates him. We gotta talk about weapons though, because it's no secret that Zombies has had some total stinkers over the years. There's certain guns that when players get them after spinning the box, they just sigh, or maybe even shout very loudly at the screen. I could cover an absolute ton of those right here, but I want to focus on a very specific one, and it appears in Black Ops 2. When you first jumped into a map like Buried back in the day and saw this, you probably thought, oh my god, I'm about to destroy these zombies. Yeah, sure. It would become obvious pretty quickly that the war machine was not what people thought. The grenades didn't even explode on landing, meaning that the undead could just jog right past them and take no damage. It was useless. If you wanted what you were kind of expecting when you got it out of the box, you'd have to make the effort to pack-a-punch it, finally making this thing actually decent. This was made even worse many years later in Cold War when we got the Score Street version in Zombies, and it absolutely obliterated them as soon as you got hold of it. Don't get me wrong, it's not like this thing could just be a full-on weapon in the mystery box as it is here, it would have been insane. But that fact didn't make the original Unpack-a-Punch version's lack of power hurt any less. And it is now time to talk about Easter eggs again. I mean, come on, it's a video about the most hated things in COD Zombies. Did you honestly think we weren't going to talk about main quests again? We may have touched on the bullet growing in Zetsubou, but let me go one step further as we take a look at another Easter egg in the same game that is generally considered to be one of the most stupid we've ever seen. The Revelations main quest hunt was long. In fact, it was insanely long. It was ridiculously long. It took the community a ton of time to work out numerous aspects of it, and one of those is very famous for being completely dumb and only added in to confuse and annoy players, and that is the infamous bone step. Whoever at Treyarch thought it was a good idea to make fans shoot random rocks around the map with the hope of revealing different bones before hoovering them up with an upgraded Apothicon servant had to be trolling when they suggested it. I bet they must have had a good laugh coming up with this task, knowing exactly how ridiculous it was and how the community was going to spend forever attempting to figure it out. And still to this day, there are not many Easter egg steps more hated than this one. Earlier I spoke about how accidentally grabbing a nuke and needlessly wiping out all of the zombies on the map can be one of the most annoying things in the game. Well, how about we touch on the exact opposite? Smart players do tons of different things in Zombies that separate them from less skilled fans, from saving a zombie at the end of the round in order to get themselves set up, to pack-a-punching very specific weapons to get hold of the best guns in a map. But another thing that loads of players will remember is waiting till the last possible second to grab a power-up like double points at the end of a round so that they can make as much profit as possible when the undead start spawning in. The only problem with this is, if you're not focusing, it can lead to one of the most anger-inducing things you can think of. Missing a power-up because you got overconfident and left it a little bit too long to grab it, completely losing out on the use of a double points because you pushed your luck too far. It doesn't matter what game it's in, it's always been something everyone can relate to, and players absolutely hate it even if it is 100% their own fault. There's something in Call of the Dead though that most players definitely don't want to pick up because it's that bad. There's a lot of stuff in that experience that was very much a one and done, things that showed up here in Siberia and then were not seen again, either forever or for a very long time. And the one thing that actually did come back many years later is probably the exact thing no one wanted to see, and that was the VR-11, one of the most pointless wonder weapons of all time. Now sure, in co-op it did have its uses which definitely made it better, but in solo, my god, next to no one would ever take this thing from the mystery box. It may have been able to act as a very weak monkey bomb, but it was not enough to compete with things like the Scavenger, which was incredible with its insane explosive abilities. But the real question is why the devs thought it was a good idea to bring back the VR-11 in MWZ. Out of all of the old school wonder weapons to choose from, you went with this. What were you thinking? And I suppose that exact question could also be asked about a perk that was introduced back in Black Ops 4. You're probably thinking, oh, which one is he talking about, as that game definitely added a few stinkers, and don't panic, we're going to cover a couple of them. But this one wasn't even left behind in BO4, it's still a major part of the game in the modern era, which is kinda nuts considering how useless it is. I am talking about death perception. The only question I gotta ask is, why do I need wall hacks in COD Zombies? It serves pretty much no purpose and it attempted to solve an issue that didn't really exist. This perk is even less applicable in the modern day game because you can take so much damage, so knowing that a zombie is going to come from around a corner and hit you honestly means next to nothing. It could well be the owner of the award for the most needless perk ever made. And it's not the only one that dropped in Black Ops 4 that really did not take off in the community's eyes, because the same thing happened with Blaze Phase. A perk in a game that rewards constant movement and training of zombies that literally requires you to stop and crouch in order to activate it. Standing still, allowing Blaze Phase to charge up before flying through zombies and wiping some of them out just doesn't really make sense in this game mode. There's not many reasons you'd ever take this over PhD Slider, and it seems like the devs realised this very quickly, because following the end of BO4 and with the move into the Dark Ether story, it was never seen again. Keeping things in the very same game though, as we've got to cover one of the most unpopular things in a map that actually ended up being a big community favourite, and that experience is Dead of the Night. So being real, it could be quite a few different things, couldn't it? Although it's loved now, at the time of release it was very controversial. The collectathon style nature of the map, huge hulking werewolves that felt very un-zombies, vampires trying to tear your head off constantly, it could be any of them. But even more shocking than these was the difficulty level of the Pack-a-Punch quest in Dead of the Night. Although now with years of experience and knowledge this may not seem as daunting as it once did, but at launch this quest was considered to be fairly insane and probably the most difficult that Treyarch had ever given us. Finding gazing stones, sacrificing zombies, watching visions, and then eventually attempting to complete whatever task related to what you'd just seen. And all that had to be completed 3 separate times in order to get access to the Pack-a-Punch area. Being realistic, for anyone who hasn't played BO4 previously, jumping into DLC 1 and attempting to figure this out is probably just never gonna happen. And it kinda makes sense as to why this PAP quest was hated by so many people. Pack-a-punching in Black Ops 4 was a difficult topic around that time, particularly as it faced some serious changes in that game and they were not popular. Before this, in Treyarch games, the most it ever went up to was double PAP, but with the arrival of the Chaos Crew and the return of Ether, it was bumped up to 5. 5 times you'd have to throw your weapon into the Pack-a-Punch to get it to max damage, with each payment barely increasing your firepower at all. It was a very unpopular decision from the devs, partly because of how it affected this game, but also because of what it would create for the future. Black Ops 4 was a big step in the direction of multiple PAP upgrades for every game. Cold War would obviously reduce it to 3, but massively increase the price, meaning it would take players a fairly long time to get max damage on a weapon, and that problem became even worse with the addition of rarities. And many fans credit BO4 with introducing that problem. And no, we're not going to dive into how Exo Zombies made you do it 20 times, we'll just ignore that because it was genuinely insane. But perhaps not as crazy as part of a Pack-a-Punch quest in IW Zombies, because my god, Rave in the Redwoods was rough for this. It was actually a decent map with some great features like Rave mode, and being real, the slasher was so intense. In terms of the PAP quest though, it could not be more simple. Find 3 parts around the map so that when you get to the docks you can use the boat to get to Turtle Island. But the problem arises when you get in the boat, because the speed of this thing should genuinely be illegal. It is criminally slow and makes upgrading your weapon in this experience so painful. I honestly don't know what the devs were thinking with this. Let's go back to Call of the Dead again and mention something that was really hated about this experience, but to be honest, it was entirely players' own fault. One of the main things about this map was obviously George Romero. Not only was he an absolute zombies legend, but he also completely changed up the gameplay in Siberia because of how he as a boss actually functioned. Camping was a thing of the past due to him constantly following players around the area, meaning fans had to come up with totally new strategies to take on the horde here. And that became so much harder when they did the one thing that everyone tried to avoid at all costs, angering George Romero. Sure, with a lot of weapons it was fairly simple to avoid, just don't shoot him. But when wiping out the zombies with the scavenger, it could cause some serious problems, as this thing had such a huge booming radius that it could put George into rage mode very easily. It was one of the only hated things about him, although to be honest, angering him was more players hating themselves than anything. If there is one thing that nearly all COD Zombies players can agree on, it's that deleting classic fan favourite perks is just not on. Thankfully it didn't happen that often, but when it does, all hell breaks loose in the community. Treyarch did it with Jug in Black Ops 4 and also a number of others, but one game before this they made one of their most hated changes ever, and that was completely dropping PhD from the list of possible perks. Some people would say, well, it makes total sense as they removed dolphin diving, so how could it exist? But then we all remember how one game later they created PhD Slider, so I fail to see why it couldn't just show up here a few years earlier. And sure, no doubt some of you watching will say, well, obviously they hadn't thought of it, had they? And I'm here to tell you, I'm not sure that's true. As in that game, they literally had two gobblegums, Slaughter Slide and Danger Closest, that were essentially two different parts of PhD Slider. One causing explosions when sliding and the other completely stopping explosive damage. So when you look at it like this, is there really any excuse for not having the perk in the game? I suppose I'll let you decide. But what about an item that is often considered to be outright toxic and has been responsible for destroying so many people's games over the years? If I say to you I'm talking about something from Buried, you know exactly what I mean, right? No, obviously not the Paralyzer, you know I mean the Time Bomb. Now, if you're playing solo, then this thing was incredible. It essentially created the first ever save game feature in COD Zombies and was loved for that reason. But in co-op, not so much, as it was 100% hated. The Time Bomb was known for making Buried completely unplayable if you were jumping in with randoms, as any time a teammate got hold of this thing from the mystery box, they would chuck it down on an early round and then just wait. They'd let you get fully set up and ready to take on some high rounds and then do the unthinkable, send you right back to the start again to when you had nothing. It was one of the worst trolls the community had ever seen and made the Time Bomb so hated. Let's go back to Easter egg steps, because although I spoke about the Revelations bone step being one of the worst of all time, I've actually got another that can rival it in terms of community hate. There are a few things closely associated with Firebase Z, like the insane Ray K84, one of the easiest boss fights of all time, and the creation of the Mimic. And it's actually that last one that causes fans to throw some serious hate at this map. Everyone remembers the Mimic step in the main quest, and not for a good reason. It essentially involved playing a game of Pokemon in COD Zombies as fans attempted to catch a number of these enemies in traps. The major problem was it was a complete nightmare, with the correct mimics only being found in specific places. And on top of that, the whole step could be completely ruined if you happen to find a normal mimic that wasn't related to the Easter egg. It drove players mad with how badly it was implemented, and it's honestly no surprise it's not looked back on fondly at all. But now it's time to discuss something that most fans never even talk about: Exo Zombies. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking, oh, he means that game was the most hated of all time, because truthfully, outside of Vanguard, maybe it was, but no, I'm getting a bit more specific here. As there are certain enemies that make this entry into the franchise nearly unplayable, and they are the EMZs. In a mode where you're supposed to constantly use an exosuit to jump around like a maniac, having an enemy that repeatedly removes that ability really felt like a total slap in the face. These annoying little scumbags would drop an EMP all the time, disabling your exosuit for around 5 seconds, forcing you to revert back to basic movement. And they were present in every single Exo Zombies map, and could well be one of the main reasons that this mode was hated. And one of those experiences was of course Infection, more commonly known as Burger Town. Out of all the content in AW, this was probably the most disliked, and it's a pretty low bar to be honest. There were many problems with this DLC, including a hugely underwhelming wonder weapon, but even that couldn't compete with Infection's worst feature. If it wasn't already clear, Zombies fans do not want to play a map that literally cuts off various areas constantly with toxic gas. Fans' only choice was to either not play in those sections while that was going on, or be forced to, as the map name suggests, get infected and then have to go to the sewers in order to cure themselves. Not only that, but it somehow gets worse with the so-called survivor rounds where zombie slayers are tasked with escorting some clueless joker across the map to escape, with failure resulting in the power being shut off for a significant portion of time. It's honestly as if the devs were in a really bad mood when they made this map, as it's full to the brim with things that are just completely anti-fun. There are honestly not many DLCs that can compete with this one when it comes to negative reputations. Oh, hold on a second actually, I think I've just thought of one. As many people consider this DLC to be unbearable and by a mile the weakest entry that was given to fans as part of World War II Zombies. Although that game clearly wasn't for everyone, it was on a fairly strong run in the eyes of the people who stuck with the title, launching with the Final Reich, moving on to the panic-inducing Darkest Shore, and then changing things up with the action-orientated Shadow Throne. And it was after this where everything fell apart. DLC 3 was very accurately named the Tortured Path, and that's exactly what this was, torture for any players who were hoping for World War II's strong run to continue. This 3 mini-map monstrosity didn't even know what it wanted to be. It wasn't entirely objective based, but it also wasn't classic round by round gameplay either. It was some freaky hybrid, and it absolutely failed for that reason. It quickly went down as a truly terrible DLC and essentially destroyed any momentum that game had. Black Ops 2 however got off to the worst possible start with its launch map Tranzit. Just because the community is more fond of its quirky nature these days, that definitely was not the case when it first landed, as it was considered to be an absolute shambles. Fog, lava, the experience just felt unfinished, but none of these things were considered as bad as the Pack-a-Punch quest. Well, actually, quest is a polite way of putting it, to be honest. I'm not sure we can class having to leave a turbine in an underground lab while you ride the bus to town, blow open the vault, all while hoping the zombies don't break it as really a quest. But don't worry, because you've also got to find the literal parts for the Pack-a-Punch as well. Surely that will make it interesting. Oh, no, it won't, because they're all downstairs in this one corridor, making that part of it totally pointless as well. Seems fair to say that this was an absolute insult to this machine and one of the most disappointing inclusions of it we've ever seen. Even cool looking enemies can have mechanics though that really do leave you wondering whether the devs lost a bet when deciding to add it. Black Ops 4 has a whole host of awesome looking mini bosses, various kinds of gladiators, the Stoker from Voyage of Despair, and even the multiple armed Giganees. But I'm not sure any of these look as intimidating as the Blightfather. This thing is one freaky looking dude, and he can definitely cause some serious panic when he shows up on the battlefield. However, he has a feature that is way more annoying than having to wipe him out. Apparently the Blightfathers have had a little bit too much to drink, as they just randomly decide to vomit on things around the map like weapons. And then you have to pay some of your precious points to clean it off as if it was your fault in the slightest. All jokes aside though, mechanics like this are so odd. They don't do anything to benefit the Great Zombies gameplay aside from being included to annoy players. It's not even as if it costs a fortune to clean this stuff up, it's almost as if it was done merely to frustrate you, and to be honest, it kinda works, as no one wants to have to deal with this nonsense. Back over to the very controversial bus-based map though, as there is another massively disliked thing in Tranzit, but to be honest, this is more of a total failure in the player department than anything else. I'll just say this, Ted is an absolute champion. He's one of the best things about this experience. His personality and character bring a ton of comedy to the map, and overall he's great. His strict bus schedule though is not. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. You're trying to get something important done and you hear this. This guy may have been hilarious, but he stressed players out so much by leaving them behind, with the bus just totally ditching them and forcing them to make their own way through the fog in order to survive. I'm not sure he can take all the blame though. I mean, he did honk the horn after all. Seems like maybe fans hate themselves here for not catching the bus on time. Tons of people forget that although World at War was responsible for the birth of this incredible mode and it was a classic, it still had some fairly significant problems. And one of the biggest is something that seems like it totally defies the laws of physics. Back in those days, of course, if you didn't have Jug, it was the classic 2-hit down system and it took no prisoners. It was so easy to end up with a game over here. And this was not helped by the fact that for some odd reason the zombies apparently had giant magnets inside of them. And old school fans will know exactly what I'm talking about. Anytime one of the undead hit you, you would be slowed to a crawl and just stuck to them as if they'd got a rope tied around you. It was infuriating, particularly when it led to you hitting the deck because you hadn't got any perks yet. And this was in times of no self-revive in solo, so if you got screwed by this, it was game over essentially. Man, it was rough back then. But even the most popular maps ever made have features that most community members absolutely cannot stand. Tons of players would probably say there are not many things wrong with Origins. In loads of people's eyes, it's pretty much the perfect map, even if it can drive you insane when you get stepped on by the world's tallest robot, but that's not what I'm talking about here. As this little chat is all about these guys, the Templar zombies. Now sure, they're not that difficult to deal with as long as you quickly realise where they are. You can stop them deactivating a generator. Well, that is unless you're currently dealing with certain steps in the crazy place. Because that is one of the most annoying things in Origins, being in that incredible looking section of the map and having to stop what you're doing to return to the trenches in order to stop these scumbags taking power or pack-a-punch away from you. Unless, I suppose, you have a nuke, of course, in the Black Ops 3 version, and then it's problem solved. A map that is nowhere near the S tier though is Die Rise, because my god is this thing hated by so many people. Just like Tranzit, it had a lot of issues. It was a fairly terrible run for Treyarch at the time, back-to-back stinkers. And of course it's pretty famous that there was no PhD in this map apart from a dirty little troll from the devs. It was the one thing that was really needed here that could have removed one of the most hated things about Die Rise, falling to your death. The effects of fall damage have never been more prevalent than in this experience. I mean, it's to be expected, it's a skyscraper after all. But damn, it feels like you can die at any second in this map without Jug. Jumps that you think would never give you a game over will actually send you right back to the lobby. And when you're fairly well set up and you make a mistake that gives you a full damage death here, there's not many things worse than that in Die Rise. That map was of course part of the much loved original Ether timeline, and as incredible as that period of Zombies was, most fans would agree that the end of it really didn't live up to expectations. And one of the major reasons for this was that technically the last original Ether map was Gorod Krovi. The general opinion is that Revelations doesn't count because it was a massive nostalgia pot based on previous maps, and then all of the content on offer in Black Ops 4 were reimaginings of older classics. Finishing a decade-long story with incredible, hugely loved characters by giving fans a couple of remakes for the last two DLCs was considered totally unacceptable by loads of players. It's not even that those maps were truly bad, it's just that they largely weren't new. And it was not the send-off that the community wanted for these heroes, even if it was due to serious budget cuts. And speaking of budget cuts, this slashing of the BO4 investment led to something else that the community completely hated, and that was the removal of full cinematic cutscenes. Early on during Black Ops 4, these things were incredible. Blood of the Dead, Voyage of Despair, Ancient Evil, they gave us some of the best looking cutscenes ever produced. But fast forward to DLC 3 and 4 and these were flat out gone, instead replaced by low budget drawn style intros and outros. And although they didn't necessarily look straight up bad, they could not compete with what came before them, and fans made their opinions on this known, leading to a less than enthusiastic ending for the Primus crew. Let's be clear though, full cinematic cutscenes do not solve everything evidently. That was pretty clear from the community's reaction to Reckoning's final cutscene. Although it looked great, it caused as much controversy as the ending of Tag to Toten, if not more. As the Requiem crew was sucked into the dark ether, we saw the reappearance of our classic characters from years earlier, but in a new form. And you would think community hype would be at an all-time high because of this, but no. It was considered as nostalgia bait, and fans were angry that there was no explanation, just a quick Richtofen line and a "Hey, join us for Black Ops 7. In hindsight, this was obviously because it was just a small snippet from the Ashes of the Damned intro cutscene, and in time fans would soften on disliking it that much when they realised that they would be getting answers very soon. But at the time, wow, was Treyarch in hot water with the community. Okay, I'm going to promise you something. This is the last time I'll mention Vanguard Zombies in this video. You have my word, as I know it's tough to listen to. Well, think of me, I actually had to play it. and I sadly had to go up against these maniacs, the Sturm Cregers. These beefy boys slowly wander around the map, essentially just annoying you, spraying at you from a distance with their miniguns. There's not many scenarios in zombies where ranged attacks that hit you from as far away as this are a good thing. And no surprise, this isn't one of them. You're already dealing with a mode that next to no one wants to play outside of Shi No Numa Reborn, and then you've also got to put up with being attacked from across the map by undead that have somehow retained the ability to use weapons against you. Ugh, let's just put Vanguard in the bin at this point. And some people get so frustrated with Moon, they'd probably say the same thing. It may have one of the best Easter egg endings of all time, but certain things leading up to that point I'm not so sure about. And the problem with the main quest you have to take on during your time in Griffin Station is not the steps themselves, it's what you need to get hold of in order to complete them. This Easter egg is like the final form of RNG. Never before or since has anything been as luck-based as this quest. You need to repeatedly spin the mystery box to get the map's wonder weapon, the wave gun. You also have to hit it until you manage to grab the Gersh devices, whilst also hoping that you'll get fortunate enough to have the excavator hit Tunnel 6 as early as possible. After that comes swapping out your current special grenades to replace them with the CODz once again from the box. And then just to annoy you even more, you have to spam it again in order to get the Gersh devices back that you've just sacrificed. If you don't get really lucky with this, it gets very unfunny very quickly, and it's truly a shame because the map and the quest are incredible. It's just a tragedy that the levels of RNG are so hated. Sticking with Easter eggs, let's throw things back over to Infinite Warfare again for an infamous step on Attack of the Radioactive thing. This map gets a lot of hate for its supposedly weak graphics, the annoying Elvira quotes, but worse than both of those is certain tasks you're required to do for the main quest, like taking part in actual school lessons. Fans were tasked with collecting ingredients and mixing them at the chemical station in the garage, which may sound easy, but anyone who's played this map will tell you it's way more boring than it sounds. You would have to do genuine maths puzzles in order to get this step done. It was just simply not fun. Newsflash, Zombies devs, yes, players like unique tasks for their main quests, they don't like feeling as if they're still in school taking part in science class. This was such a weird choice. Something way better could be found in 5, but even though this mechanic was very unique, it still caused players to end up hating some of their time in the map. The most special thing about jumping into this experience as the cast of political leaders is constantly being on the edge of your seat for when the Pentagon thief shows up and tries to snatch your precious weapons. This was a stressful time in 5 and resulted in some full-on rage bits if you managed to grab something off you, as you had to try and just hunt him down to get some free power-ups and get your gear back, but it wasn't easy if you lost sight of him. And this was so much worse if you'd already pack-a-punch your weapon. Damn, some people hated this guy. But maybe they'd be less bothered about this full-on theft if he managed to grab one very specific item from you. Wonder weapons are the best things in a map, right? Well, that's usually the case, but of course 5 completely breaks that rule by giving players the pointlessly bad Winter's Howl. There are very few of these things that are as awful as this. It's tragically so weak that you wouldn't even bother to grab it out of the mystery box or care if the Pentagon thief snatched it from you because it's so terrible at wiping out zombies. Thankfully though, once Treyarch reimagined this map into Classified, they buffed the Winter's Howl massively and made it way better. But as for the version found in the Black Ops 1 Pentagon, it's probably one of the most hated wonder weapons in the game. It was so underpowered, it probably couldn't have even taken out the most infamous, annoying little creatures on Transit. You talk about the most hated things in COD Zombies history, and no doubt these guys are going to come up in the conversation: Denizens. I don't know if we can even class them as an enemy. All they literally are is a speed deterrent or a game loading assist, if you will. Denizens were only added to slow players down in various areas so the devs could give the experience time to load in the rest of the map. There's a ton of reasons that make Transit a total chore to play, some of which I went through earlier. But these things jumping on your face and doing their thing, shall we say, is just painful, and totally understandably the community absolutely despises them.